What if the person you trusted the most, the person you thought was your soulmate, turned out to be someone from your darkest past? Imagine being in a moment of perfect happiness, finally finding love after years of struggling with your past. You meet someone who seems like the one, everything you've ever dreamed of. You marry them, you build a life together, and for once, you feel like you're finally moving forward. But then, the world you've carefully built around you starts to crack. Suddenly, the person who you thought was your safe harbor begins to slip through your fingers, revealing something that shakes you to your core. What if the woman you married wasn't the person you thought she was at all? This is the story of a man named James Montgomery, a man who thought his past was long buried, just like the dark secrets he had buried in a distant corner of his mind. For years, he lived in the shadows of his previous life, haunted by the terrible things he'd done. But after a whirlwind romance and a beautiful wedding, James believed he had finally left it all behind. He married Sarah, a woman he thought he'd known. She was everything he had ever wanted. Kind, loving, and seemingly perfect for him. He could see a future with her, one free from the mistakes of his past. Or so he thought. But soon, cracks began to appear in the facade. Little things, like the way Sarah would react when certain names came up, or how she would go pale when he mentioned his old neighborhood. James brushed them off at first, thinking they were just small quirks or coincidences. But deep inside, something fell off. Something wasn't quite right, though he couldn't place what it was. And that something, lurking beneath the surface, was about to turn his world upside down. It all started one evening when James stumbled across an old photograph, buried deep in a box of old memories. The picture was of a woman he used to know, his ex-girlfriend Michelle, a woman he hadn't thought about in years. But the photo wasn't just a reminder of an old relationship. It was a ghost from his past that he never expected to see again. James's heart sank as he stared at the photo. He had killed Michelle. He was certain of it. 10 years ago, he had taken her life in a fit of rage, buried her body, and convinced himself that he had put the past to rest. The case had gone cold. The police had never found her. No one ever knew the truth, except him. But what James didn't know was that the woman standing before him, the woman he had married, Sarah, was not the stranger he thought she was. She was someone from his past, the same woman he believed he had buried, the woman he thought was dead. Before we continue, let's take a moment. This chilling true crime story is just beginning, and what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything. If you're ready for the shocking twists and revelations ahead, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the chilling details. You won't want to miss what comes next. James Montgomery was a man who had managed to escape his past, or so he thought. In his early 40s, he had worked hard to build a life that seemed like the definition of success. He was a businessman, respected in his field, known for his sharp mind and unwavering work ethic. His friends admired him, and his family trusted him. But more importantly, James had always wanted to find love, a love that would wipe away the darker memories of his youth. James Montgomery had built a life that seemed too good to be true. A successful businessman, loved by his friends and family, and newly married to Sarah. He had everything he thought he ever wanted. Despite the glitz and success of his career, James's life had always felt incomplete. He had been haunted by a secret, one that he had buried deep inside. A past mistake he could never erase. Still, as time went on, he convinced himself that he had left that life behind, until Sarah entered his world. Sarah was everything James had ever dreamed of. She was in her early 30s, beautiful, kind-hearted, and radiated an aura of perfection. Her presence seemed to fill every room, making everyone around her feel at ease. She was compassionate, always thinking of others before herself. She volunteered at local shelters, helped with community outreach programs, and had an infectious smile that could make anyone's day. Sarah was everything James had ever dreamed of. Compassionate, loving, and seemingly flawless in every way. Her kindness made James feel as though he had finally found someone who would accept him for who he truly was. In her, He saw someone he could trust, someone he could build a life with. She was the antidote to the darkness that had lingered over him for so long. To James, she seemed like the perfect match, the partner he had always been searching for. James and Sarah's relationship moved quickly. From their first date to their first kiss, everything felt like it was meant to be. Their connection was undeniable, as if the universe had brought them together for a reason. Within months, they were engaged, and just a few months after that, they were married. It was a fairy tale romance. James and Sarah met, fell in love, and were married within months. Their wedding was perfect, and everyone who knew them believed they were meant to be together forever. Their wedding was a spectacle, a grand affair held in a beautiful venue, with friends and family surrounding them to witness their union. There were tears of joy, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of happiness. James had never felt more alive, and he thought this was the life he had been waiting for. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the past was behind him, and nothing could ruin the future he had just started with Sarah. But despite the picture-perfect life they seemed to have, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started as small, inconspicuous moments. Sarah would act distant when James would talk about his past, especially his former girlfriend, Michelle. James never pushed the topic much, assuming it was just a sensitivity to things he didn't know about her past. But over time, the signs became harder to ignore. James could never shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah would act strangely whenever he talked about his past, especially when the name Michelle came up. But he brushed it off until it became harder to ignore. Sarah's responses seemed rehearsed. There were times when she seemed genuinely uncomfortable whenever Michelle's name was mentioned. Her eyes would drop, her smile would fade, and there was a brief moment of silence before she would change the subject. James figured it was a coincidence at first. After all, everyone has their quirks, and Sarah was, in many ways, the woman he always wanted. But as their marriage progressed, the oddities grew harder to ignore. On their honeymoon, for example, Sarah would sometimes avoid certain locations that James thought were harmless, places that she had never visited before. She would stiffen when certain discussions came up about relationships, even though they were light-hearted topics. There was something Sarah wasn't saying. James could feel it, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The fear crept in slowly. What if there was more to Sarah than he had realized? What if this perfect life wasn't so perfect after all? It started with something so small, a simple task that anyone might do on any given evening. James was cleaning out the attic, sorting through old boxes that were gathering dust. He came across a box of old memorabilia, stuff that had been hidden away for years. As he dug through it, his fingers brushed against a newspaper clipping. He pulled it out, curious about its contents. The headline read, "Local woman missing after tragic fight with boyfriend." His heart skipped a beat. He looked at the photo accompanying the article. The image of the woman was grainy and faded with time, but he didn't need to see more to know who she was. It was Michelle, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he had thought he killed. The words seemed to blur in front of his eyes as the memories came rushing back. That night, the fight, the rage, the fear. It was all coming back in a rush, like it had never been buried at all. He had killed her. Or at least, that's what he thought. He had buried her body. The police had never found any trace of her. Her disappearance had been classified as a cold case, another unsolved mystery. But now he was staring at her face, alive in a picture he thought would never surface again. James couldn't shake the feeling that the world was collapsing around him. What did this mean? Had Michelle survived? Or was this some kind of sick coincidence? What was Sarah's connection to all of this? James didn't mention it to Sarah right away. He wasn't sure how to process it all, how to even begin asking the woman he had just married about something so terrifying. But as the days went by, the unease settled deeper into his bones. Sarah's behavior started to feel off. She became nervous whenever he asked simple questions about her past, things that he should have known by now, things he thought were inconsequential. But the way she reacted was anything but casual. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Was Michelle justified in seeking revenge, or could there have been another way? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss the remaining part of the story. Every time the conversation veered toward her past, Sarah would grow quiet. Her smile would fade, her eyes would dart nervously, and she'd change the subject in a heartbeat. She started avoiding certain topics altogether, and even when she spoke about her own family, there was something distant, almost rehearsed, in her tone. James tried to brush it off, but something didn't feel right. Whenever he brought up the past, Sarah would go quiet. Her eyes would dart nervously, and she would quickly change the subject. James noticed she would often become tense when he mentioned his old apartment, the one he had lived in before they moved into their new house together. There was an unnerving reluctance on her part whenever he asked her questions about where she'd lived, how she had grown up, or what she had been doing before they met. Something was being hidden, but he couldn't figure out exactly what. The more James tried to ignore the clues, the more they seemed to haunt him. It wasn't just the way Sarah acted. There was also the creeping sensation in his gut, telling him that something was deeply wrong. He began to remember things about Michelle, her smile, the way she would laugh at his silly jokes, the familiar warmth of her presence. And suddenly, Sarah's face started to look too familiar. It was as if he had seen her before in a different time, in a different life. As memories of Michelle came flooding back, James began to wonder, could Sarah be hiding something? Or was his mind playing tricks on him? Was he simply paranoid, or was something darker at play? He started to connect odd dots, things he had dismissed earlier. Sarah's eyes, the same shade of blue as Michelle's. The way she would react when certain places or names came up. The nervousness that flashed in her eyes when she saw a picture of his old apartment. She seemed to recognize it too well. Could it be that Sarah was Michelle, his dead girlfriend? Was she the one who had survived, changed her identity, and come back into his life to haunt him? James spent restless nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the thought that his perfect wife was somehow connected to the nightmare he had buried long ago. Could it be true? Could Sarah be Michelle, the woman he had thought he killed? The discovery of the article about Michelle was the first real clue that set James on the path to unraveling the truth. But it was also the beginning of the psychological torment that would follow. James was trapped between what he believed to be true and the terrifying possibility that the woman he had married might not be who she appeared to be. The weight of the past was becoming unbearable. James had spent days trying to ignore the mounting evidence, but the truth was too clear to ignore any longer. His suspicions about Sarah's behavior, the strange coincidences, the unease he felt whenever certain topics came up, it all led him to one inescapable conclusion. The woman he had married was hiding something dark. One evening, after what seemed like hours of pacing in his living room, James could no longer hold back. His heart raced, his palms sweaty as he stood before Sarah. He held up the newspaper article, the one with Michelle's photo staring back at him. His voice cracked as he demanded the truth. Unable to ignore the mounting evidence, James confronted Sarah one evening. "Who are you really, Sarah?" he asked, his voice trembling. He held up the newspaper article and showed her the picture of Michelle. "Tell me the truth." The tension in the room was suffocating. James could feel his hands shaking as he pointed at the photo, his mind racing. Everything, his marriage, his future, his whole life, seemed to be unraveling before his eyes. He needed answers. He needed to understand how he could have been so blind. At first, Sarah tried to brush it off, her face flushed with denial. She claimed that James was imagining things, that the photograph was just a coincidence, that it wasn't her. She was quick to dismiss the accusations, her words coming out in a defensive rush. But the more James pressed, the more uneasy she became. Her usual calm demeanor crumbled, and something darker began to surface in her eyes. At first, Sarah denied it. She claimed James was imagining things. But as he pushed further, her face drained of color, and she stood up, backing away from him. Then, in a low, trembling voice, she said, "I'm Michelle, the woman you thought you killed." Sarah's words hit James like a punch to the stomach. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to freeze. He stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. It couldn't be true. He had killed her, buried her. There was no way it was her. But the look in her eyes, the way she stood there, she was no longer his wife. She wasn't Sarah. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wanted to scream, to demand that she explain it all away as some sick joke. But there was no denying it. Michelle, the woman he thought he had murdered, was standing right in front of him. Sarah, now admitting to being Michelle, explained how she had faked her death. She had somehow survived the attack, watched James move on with his life, and plotted her return for years. But this time it wasn't for love, it was for revenge. Michelle spoke of her grief, the years she spent recovering, hiding, and plotting her next move. She explained how she had endured pain and loss, watching James get married to another woman, build a life with someone else, all while she was living in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Revenge was no longer a fleeting thought, it was a plan, a mission. And James was at the center of it all. She wanted him to suffer, to feel the agony of the betrayal she had endured. All these years he had thought he was free of her, but Michelle had always been watching, always waiting for the right time to strike. James's world was spinning. His emotions were a tangled mess of shock, guilt, fear, and disbelief. Could it be true? Could Michelle have really survived? How could he have been so blind to the signs? The questions piled up in his mind, but none of them could take away the cold truth. The woman standing in front of him was the same woman he had left in the grave. The same woman he had erased from his memory. James could feel the weight of the past crashing down on him. He had been living a lie, and now the consequences of his past actions were staring him in the face. How could he ever move on from this? Was there any chance for redemption, or had Michelle's plan already sealed his fate? This moment marks the turning point for James. His world, built on lies and assumptions, begins to crumble as Michelle's confession unfolds. The audience is left in suspense, wondering how James will handle the weight of this discovery and what Michelle's ultimate plan will be. Will she seek revenge? Will James confess his crime, or will he try to cover it up? The room felt like it was closing in on him. James was frozen in place, unable to grasp the enormity of what Sarah, Michelle, had just revealed. His hands trembled as he looked at her, struggling to comprehend the truth. How could this be happening? He had spent years thinking he had murdered her, buried her, and gotten away with it. But now she was standing in front of him, alive, and everything he thought he knew about his life was shattered. James staggered back, his mind reeling. "This can't be real," he muttered. "You're dead. I killed you. I buried you." The guilt of what he had done weighed heavily on him as the reality of his actions set in. The words felt like they were coming from someone else. His voice was barely his own. He was in shock, torn between disbelief and the gnawing feeling that the truth was now staring him in the face. Every moment of guilt he had suppressed for the past decade came rushing back in a tidal wave. He could feel the weight of it in his chest, squeezing the air out of his lungs. Had he really done it? Had he truly killed Michelle, buried her without a second thought, and lived these past years in a lie? His heart hammered in his chest, his mind a blur of confusion and horror. He had thought it was over. He had convinced himself that Michelle's death was a closed chapter. But now, with Michelle standing there before him, the memories were too much to ignore. The realization of his past actions hit him like a ton of bricks. The guilt wasn't just emotional, it was physical, suffocating him. He could still hear her screams, feel the coldness of the shovel in his hands as he buried her. And now, she was standing right in front of him, not as the woman he had loved, but as a vengeful ghost from his darkest days. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss the remaining part of the story. Michelle's face was calm now, almost eerily so. She watched James's emotional breakdown with a cold detachment. For her, there was no room for forgiveness, only retribution. She wasn't the woman who had once loved him. That woman had died long ago, replaced by someone who had spent years nursing a bitterness too deep to heal. She wasn't interested in reconciliation. Michelle wanted revenge, and she was finally in control. Michelle revealed her plan. She wanted James to experience the same heartbreak and terror she felt when he killed her. It wasn't just about vengeance. It was about making him understand her pain. Michelle's voice was steady, almost monotone, as she explained her meticulous plan. She had watched him all these years, as he lived a life of comfort and success, never knowing the consequences of what he had done. She had stayed in the shadows, observing him, waiting for the right time to make him face the torment she had suffered. "I wasn't going to let you forget what you did to me, James. You've had your happy life, your perfect wife, your career. But you never thought about me. I've lived in hiding, in pain. And now, I'm here to make you feel what I felt." Her words were like a knife to James's chest. The anger that had fueled her years of survival was palpable. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, in her eyes. Justice for the life she could never have, for the years she spent as a shadow, always wondering when her time would come. Michelle wasn't the woman James had known. She had been remade by anger, betrayal, and the need to make him suffer. The calmness in her demeanor only made the threat that much more terrifying. What do you think? Was Michelle's plan justified? Would you have sought revenge in her shoes? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Was there another way for Michelle to have handled this, or was revenge the only thing left for her? With Michelle's plan now revealed, the tension between her and James continues to build. James is trapped, racked with guilt, and unsure of what to do next. His emotions are in turmoil, and the psychological weight of the situation starts to tear him apart. James was drowning in a sea of guilt and regret. The weight of everything that had happened, everything he had done, seemed too much to bear. The truth, which he had once been so certain about, was now a twisted, suffocating reality. Michelle, the woman he thought he had killed and buried, was alive, and she had been living a life of agony and survival for years. She had watched him move on while she was left in the shadows, nursing her pain and plotting her return. But now, it wasn't just about Michelle anymore. It was about James, the man who had buried his past and thought he was free of it. He wasn't free. He was trapped by the consequences of his actions, and there was no escape. James's world began to fall apart. Could he ever come to terms with what he had done? Was it too late for redemption, or was he destined to live with the consequences forever? Every moment felt like an eternity. James had spent the last decade running from his past, hiding in the comfort of his new life. But now that life felt empty, shattered. Michelle's return had reopened the deepest wounds he thought he had buried, and the emotional toll was breaking him down. The guilt of taking someone's life, no matter how justified he had convinced himself it was now consuming him. He was no longer the man he had once been. The realization of the betrayal he had committed against Michelle and the consequences that were coming tore through him. Could he ever make things right? Or was it too late for any form of redemption? The discovery of Michelle's survival, her confession, and James's own admission were soon to become the focus of public attention. What had once been a cold case, one that had been buried in time, was now making headlines again. And this time, it wasn't just the case of a missing woman. It was the story of revenge, betrayal, and a man who had been living with the darkest secret of all. As Michelle's miraculous survival came to light, so did the details of the crime that James had thought was buried forever. The media storm surrounding the case was unrelenting. Every moment of James's life was now under a microscope. People who had once respected him now questioned his very integrity and morality. His life, which had seemed so perfect, was crumbling in front of his eyes. The media frenzy around the case was overwhelming. As Michelle's miraculous survival became public knowledge, James's confession tore through the headlines. The courtroom battle that followed would be a spectacle of emotion, guilt, and a quest for justice. The courtroom became the next battleground, a place where the consequences of James's actions would be judged by the law, but also by public opinion. The trial that followed was full of emotional testimony, as both James and Michelle recounted the horrors of the past. For Michelle, it was the chance to bring justice to her pain, to make James pay for what he had done. For James, it was the last chance to face the consequences of his crime. But no matter what happened in the courtroom, the truth was clear. James had to face the music for the horrible act he had committed all those years ago. The question now wasn't whether he was guilty, but how he would live with his guilt, no matter what the legal outcome would be. The story raises the age-old question of whether revenge is ever truly justified. Michelle had spent years plotting her return, watching James from the shadows, biding her time until the moment was right. But in the end, did her revenge really bring her the justice she thought she deserved? Or was it simply a means of perpetuating a cycle of pain that could never be broken? Was Michelle's revenge ever worth it? Did James deserve to face the consequences? Or could there have been another way to resolve the darkness between them? The question of whether forgiveness could have been an option lingers. Could Michelle have found peace without exacting revenge? Was there another way for her to deal with the trauma she had experienced? Or was revenge the only way she could make sense of her years of suffering? And for James, was there a way to atone for what he had done? Or was the guilt he felt simply a punishment in itself? Could he ever hope for any form of redemption? Or was he condemned to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life? Thank you for watching. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories. We'll be back with more chilling cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat.